Smell what the Rock is cooking.
And next up here on Showcasing the Immortals, we highlight The Rock, the People's Champ, the Great One, the Brahma Bull, the jabroni-beaten, pie-eaten, you know, heart-stomping, elbow-dropping People's Champ, The Rock. You know, The Rock is one of the most charismatic personalities in the history of the business, one of its biggest stars, really had major crossover appeal as shown by his film career. I mean, no other wrestlers had the crossover success of The Rock. Not even close. It's, you know, The Rock's film career, and he's made a share of bad movies, but the fact that he's able to be a regular presence in Hollywood in big movies, post-wrestling career, or post the, you know, glory days of his wrestling career, shows the kind of magnetism that he has as a performer and as a star. And when you take that type of personality and you highlight it at WrestleMania, it's going to yield exciting results more often than not. And with The Rock, it usually did. Usually in big main events and major matches, The Rock's WrestleMania contributions were typically very exciting showcases for his personality, and especially when they put him up against somebody that could match him in terms of charisma and crowd reaction, and someone that was different from him, you know, same level of charisma but a different personality, it yielded even better results because you got a great character clash and a great match out of it as well. And let's begin with his WrestleMania debut at WrestleMania 13 as Rocky Maivia, the Intercontinental Champion, going up against the Sultan. And if you don't remember the Sultan, it was a character played by Rikishi, and he basically wore a red Bane mask, you know, long before The Dark Knight Rises was even conceived. And he, you know, rewatching it recently, was like, wow, that looks like Bane's mask. But, you know, a shitty gimmick, and Rocky Maivia was not much better. Obviously, it was a character that just failed. He was a happy-go-lucky, smiling doofus babyface, and this was an era that craved something different. We wanted the Stone Cold Steve Austins of the world. And Rocky Maivia just didn't fit. And as a result, this match was boring. Nobody cared. People booed Rocky, which was the norm at the time. Rocky sucks. Die, Rocky, die. I mean, this was the stuff that was the norm. And it's really funny how, you know, one of the most charismatic stars of all time, you look at his first WrestleMania, it's like, I can't believe he became what he eventually became. It's really weird. And actually, you know, this match sucked. I'm not going to say it didn't. And it was amazing how much he changed within a year. He successfully retained the Intercontinental title here. Nobody cared. But then you go into WrestleMania 14, which is like the change in tone and presentation between 13 and 14 is just staggering. It's almost like night and day. And The Rock is a major showcase for that level of change because he went from Rocky Maivia, this doofus babyface that nobody liked, to being the second in command of the Nation of Domination, and this really great, cocky, obnoxious heel with all these catchphrases and this, you know, always talking in the third person and coming up with all this great material. It was just this perfect jackass weasel heel, and oh my god, he's so much better this way. Who'd have thunk it? And he defended the Intercontinental title again, this time against Ken Shamrock, in a feud that had been built up for a long time. You know, they'd had the first match of the Royal Rumble, and they typically had really good matches together. This WrestleMania match was not one of their good competitive matches. It was not, you know, Shamrock pretty much just went out there and destroyed The Rock and beat the ever-living dog crap out of him, and that was basically the match. But while it wasn't the most competitive match, it did a fantastic job of enhancing the characters that were involved with it, because Shamrock dispensed with The Rock almost easily, and beat him with the ankle lock and everything, and it looked like Shamrock was the new champion. But Shamrock went crazy and started attacking referees because he wanted to beat up The Rock so bad, because Rock had, you know, been cheating him and screwing him for 3 or 4 months, and he refused to break the ankle lock. And as a result, the decision was reversed, and Rock was ultimately declared the Intercontinental Champion. So Rock got this great heel weasel victory. Shamrock looked like a total badass. And Farouk, who was the leader of the Nation of Domination, ran out there and looked like he was going to help The Rock. But then he decided not to, and he just left The Rock to the Wolves, which played up the animosity that those two had been having going into that. And it eventually set up the Nation of Domination to turn on Farouk and ultimately choose The Rock as their leader. And, ultimately, all the characters involved with this came off so much better. And, it just goes to show you don't always have to have the best match. You don't always have to have, a 5-star classic or even like a really good back-and-forth competitive match. You just got to book the right situation to make all the characters come out as strong as possible. And this was one of those situations where really nobody was hurt by this outcome. Rock came out stronger, Shamrock looked like a fucking killing machine, and it just came off really, really well, even though it wasn't one of the better matches on the show. Just tremendous booking. I can't praise that enough. Then we go, Rock's rise continues to skyrocket from there to show that how that match, only benefited him. He eventually worked his way through the Intercontinental title ranks. I think Rock's one of the better Intercontinental champions. That reign he had in '98, I think he's up there with the Shawn Michaels, the Kurt Hennigs, Randy Savage in the 80s. I really love that reign as Intercontinental Champion. But, all good things must come to an end. He eventually lost the title to Triple H at SummerSlam in that really good ladder match that, often goes unsung. But go check that match out. It's a really good one. And that put him on the path to eventually becoming the WWF Champion in one of the best booked heel changes and complete nights in wrestling history, Survivor Series 98, where Rock was revealed as the corporate champion and became Vince's poster boy for the company and basically the anti-Steve Austin. And, that leads into this WrestleMania match where Rock defended the title against Stone Cold Steve Austin, which was, for Austin, he'd had this whole storyline having to overcome all of Vince's obstacles, but for The Rock, he was the perfect opponent for Steve Austin because Austin was this bald-headed redneck that cursed all the time. Rock was this clean-cut, young, handsome guy. And you could see how somebody like, this corporate, overly conservative douche like Vince McMahon with a pull up his butt would see the appeal in somebody like The Rock, who was clean-cut, presentable, somebody that you could put on your posters and be like the ultimate good-looking guy. And he really worked very well as that corporate champion role. Something that Austin did not work as. Austin as the corporate champion did not work. But Rock fitting that role was absolutely perfect. And again, he kept playing this awesome heel. More and more, it seemed like he was creating a new catchphrase every week, and all of them stuck. It was really funny. And Rock, even though he was the heel, was a very entertaining personality. And you loved hating him. And he was so good. He was so good in that role, and him and Austin had fantastic chemistry, and anybody who watched their series of matches will tell you that, and that certainly showed here at WrestleMania 15, where they had an outstanding match. It was a really wild, chaotic brawl, which was really on par with the times. A lot of Attitude Era main events had this just wild, brawl all over the arena. It's always a no DQ match. Referees are getting bumped left and right, and ultimately I think that got oversaturated and people kind of got tired of it. But for the times, it just fit the time period of where everything is high energy, everything is high chaos, and this main event basically executed that formula perfectly. And I thought it was a really exciting, really entertaining match that Austin ultimately won and really began Rock's streak of WrestleMania main events where he would always lose. Which is why I kind of laugh when John Cena on a recent edition of Raw said that, The Rock doesn't know what failure's like. And I'm like, okay, number one, the dude made Doom. Number two, the character in wrestling storylines main evented 3 WrestleManias in a row in the WWF title match, and he lost all 3 times. I call it his Jim Kelly stretch. Always in the main event, but always losing. And, it was really a bizarre period that you had this major, larger-than-life star in the main event at WrestleMania, and he always lost. It was really strange. And the year he should have won was at WrestleMania 2000. It was champion Triple H versus Mick Foley versus Big Show versus The Rock for the WWF title. I was not a fan of them making this match a 4-way. I felt like it should have been Triple H and The Rock one-on-one straight up. But even as the 4-way, the elimination rules, I'm like, okay, either Rock's going to win the title or Foley's going to win the title. And once Foley got eliminated, I'm like, okay, Rock's going to win the title. And, he'd won the Royal Rumble that year. He was a babyface by this point, and it was really one of those cases where the second they turned Rock face, it was just like he instantly became one of the most popular guys on the show. It was the fans had no qualms about accepting him as a babyface, even though he'd been a heel for so long. And again, that's just an indicator of how entertaining The Rock's personality really was, and how energetic and how engaging he was in his prime. And WrestleMania 2000 should have been his year to walk out of Mania with the title. You have that shot of Shawn Michaels winning the belt at 12, Bret winning it at 10, the years that Hogan won, Warrior winning at 6, Undertaker winning at 13, Austin winning at 14. You have all these shots of these guys holding the belt up at the end of WrestleMania, and Rock doesn't have that. And it's really bizarre, and by all rights, he should have won at WrestleMania 2000, and ultimately he would, it's not like Rock would have a shortage of WWF title reigns. I mean, he ended up winning, 7 or 8 total, and he would win it the next month at Backlash, but, is it the road to WrestleMania or is it the road to Backlash? I think they should have done the big title change at Backlash. And it really did feel like they had that thought. It's like, well, we want to get the bigger buy rate for the B pay-per-view that might not do as well. WrestleMania is going to do good regardless, so we don't have to give them the big ending. And I really felt like that kind of sucked. And Triple H retaining the title was probably the most anticlimactic ending to any WrestleMania ever. And that should have been Rock's night. That should have been his big highlight, WrestleMania title win. And not that Rock's career is any less for not having that, but it's just for the sake of a WrestleMania highlight reel, it should have happened. And I'll never understand, I'll never agree with that move, to have Rock lose at WrestleMania 2000. But as the match itself, I think the ending really hurts it and really, ends the show on a really downer note. But the match itself as a whole really isn't that bad, especially when it comes down to Rock and Triple H. I thought it was pretty exciting. But then we move right along to WrestleMania 17, which is highly regarded as one of the greatest WrestleManias of all time, and rightfully so. And the major focus of that show was the main event, which once again we got The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. And unlike Rock and Cena 2, which I'm going to get into the Rock and Cena stuff later, but where really nobody wants that match, actually nobody wants a rematch between those two. Rock and Austin, their pairing was so exciting that when they did this rematch, people were salivating for it. It's like, oh yeah, we want Rock and Austin too. And it worked even better this time around because both guys were babyfaces. And The Rock at this point had a level of popularity that rivaled Austin's, so putting them together was just fascinating. It was really, really exciting and interesting. It was like Hogan Warrior all over again. It was like, all right, we got these two big baby faces in arguably the hottest period in the history of professional wrestling. This was, again, if you weren't around during the Attitude Era, it was the most exciting time in professional wrestling. Not just because of the WWF, but when WCW and ECW were all at their best. It was, oh my God, I would kill to have those days back. But when you had Austin and The Rock at WrestleMania 17, at that venue, because that was one of the first big Mania venues in a while, and you put them on that kind of a stage, it's going to be awesome. And it was. I love that match. It's one of my personal favorite WrestleMania main events. Rock got booed, but that's because the show was in Texas. And, I'm pretty sure Austin could have murdered a kid, and they still would have cheered him. It was just one of those things. But even so, it was a very exciting match all around. And just, again, it's two strong characters playing off of each other and putting on one hell of a match. One hell of a match. Bloody, violent, action-packed. And Rock certainly held up his end of the deal. It was one of Rock's better performances. One of his better individual performances. And I think it's easily one of the greatest WrestleMania main events of all time. I would even go as far to say that it's the greatest match in WrestleMania history, except for one thing, and that's the ending. And I'll get into that when I'll analyze that later, but I really do hold that match in a very high esteem. And, I think as far as WrestleMania matches go, I think it's arguably Rock's best. However, he would have another one at WrestleMania 18, this big dream match that we never thought we would ever get in a million years. And if Rock and Austin was interesting and exciting, how about The Rock versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania? And again, if you weren't around at that time during the Attitude Era, we never thought Hogan was ever going to come back to wrestling, to the WWF. We never thought we would ever see that again. And for him to come back, and for his first pay-per-view match right out of the box to be against The Rock, I mean, holy crap. Holy crap. It was exciting. It was interesting. And again, it was just like, this two great charismatic characters facing off on the grand stage. It was interesting. It was exciting. I tuned in just to see what would happen when you put those two together. I knew Rock was going to win the match, but I didn't know how it was going to play out. I didn't know what kind of emotion, putting those two together was going to create. And sure enough, it generated one of the most emotionally charged matches I've ever seen in my life. Maybe the most emotionally charged match I've ever seen in my life. And, again, The Rock got booed big time, really big, because it was, the crowd went for nostalgia and ultimately sided with Hogan. But Rock, you needed both of them to really make that match work as well as it did. And having Rock in there, I think, made the match extremely exciting. And it was really one of those dream pairings. I was more interested in seeing Hogan Rock than I was Hogan Austin, to be perfectly honest. I know a lot of people wanted Hogan Austin. I did too, but not at that point, because I felt like Austin's character had really taken a lot of damage by that point. So I wasn't really that interested in seeing that. The one I wanted was Hogan Rock. I thought that was the better match to do at that point in time. Rock was still red hot. Hogan was coming in with a lot of hype, considering it was his return to the company. And Austin, I felt, it kind of faded, especially after the heel turn. But that match was just glorious. It was a glorious, glorious match, and it's one of the times where a dream match really, really paid off. And I think if the match with Austin at WrestleMania 17 isn't Rock's best at Mania, that one is. That one is just so emotionally charged and so exciting and so transcendent. It just transcends wrestling. I don't know of any other way to describe it. And again, it's just a testament to just how exciting, you put The Rock in a situation, it generates excitement. And this was definitely, probably the best example of that. And then The Rock went on, changed his character again. He had started getting into movies, and wrestling was becoming a part-time thing. Ultimately, he would go for movies entirely and put wrestling behind him, although, he's back now. But WrestleMania 19, The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin for the third time. And The Rock's character at this point, the way he reinvented himself was just absolutely amazing. The Hollywood Rock. I think creatively might arguably be the most entertaining run of his career. He was just a Rock. At that point, Rock could do no wrong. He just could make anything work, it seemed. And this great cocky, character that he'd made for himself that was really based off of a perception that fans had that he was, he'd sold out, he'd put wrestling behind him, and he'd sold out, and they basically turned that perception into the best wrestling character imaginable at that time. And it really worked well. And to see Austin and Rock work together one more time as a trilogy and really serve as a swan song to that rivalry, and ultimately for Austin as well, it really worked amazingly well. And I think it's I don't think it's their best match. I still think their 17 match is the best, but it is a very exciting match. It's a very emotionally charged match, and Rock finally got the big win over Stone Cold Steve Austin, so it felt like it really closed the book on that rivalry with Rock finally getting the WrestleMania win over Austin. And it was just great to see them clash one more time, and I really enjoy that match. It's really exciting and very good. And next up was WrestleMania 20, which we all thought at the time might be Rock's final WrestleMania match. But he was a babyface again, and he had tagged with Mick Foley to reform the Rock and Sock Connection, which, if you've never heard me talk about the Rock and Sock Connection, some of the best comedy the WWF has ever done, WWE, sorry, was the Rock and Sock Connection. Their stuff was fucking hilarious. So I love the Rock and Sock Connection. Not only for its comedy, but it was also, after a while, it became one of the more heartfelt pairings and friendships and bonds that had ever been made in wrestling history. So to have The Rock come back and help his friend Mick Foley against Randy Orton, Ric Flair, and Batista, I thought was a nice attraction for WrestleMania, although The Rock was kind of playing the supporting role here. The real stars in the match were Mick Foley and Randy Orton, because they were the centerpiece of the feud. And ultimately, they were the big match that, they were the two that really generated this match taking place at all. And Rock kind of felt like he was in a supporting role, as were Ric Flair and Batista, which was weird for Rock to be in that kind of a role, but the attraction of having Rock and Sock back was enough to make this WrestleMania match feel like it was a WrestleMania caliber match. And I gotta be honest, even though they were the supporting players, I thought The Rock and Ric Flair had amazing chemistry together. I thought they were so funny together. I think of Ric Flair doing the people's elbow and The Rock like smacking the shit out of him at one point. It was just, I thought the chemistry that they had together from a comedy standpoint was just really, really, really good. I could watch Ric Flair do that people's elbow every day. But that match was exciting. It was fun. Really entertaining. Randy Orton got the win over Foley. Again, they were the major focus, so they needed to be involved in whatever the finish was. And, The Rock and Ric Flair just kind of felt like bells and whistles there to kind of dress up the tag match. But, for the role that they played, and especially The Rock, he brings excitement to the table. It worked really well. And although it wasn't a good last WrestleMania match for The Rock, you think that The Rock would play a bigger role in his final WrestleMania match. And sure enough, The Rock would go away for a few years and ultimately make his return to WrestleMania. He returned at WrestleMania 27 as the guest host, which I still don't understand why WrestleMania needs a guest host. Again, enhancing my major problems with that show where they went for a Saturday Night Live format rather than a wrestling show format, and it was just infuriating. And the backstage segments that Rock was a part of were just ungodly unbearable. And I'm not blaming him so much as I am blaming the writers and whoever it was that put a lot of those segments together. And he wasn't even in all of them. It was just the theme of the night. Bad comedy segments. And but where The Rock really made his mark on that WrestleMania was when he helped The Miz defeat John Cena to retain the WWE title, because that was when they were really starting to build a John Cena-Rock feud. Which was an interesting match to do, because again, it was kind of that Hogan-Rock appeal where it's the guy of today versus the guy of the previous era. The problem is that so many of us hate John Cena that, if you're a male above the age of 12, you're probably going to root for The Rock over John Cena. That's, just a guess. Because he's just so much cooler than Cena. And Cena is the guy who, by that point, we'd just been sick to death of. So it wasn't quite a Hogan and Rock type of thing, but it was an interesting one just for that era versus era type of pairing. And it would ultimately lead into their WrestleMania match being signed a year in advance. And they would just spend a year promoting that match. And, I've made my feelings clear about this match. I feel like, and I guess I already touched up on it, but they wanted us to think of it as one of the great WrestleMania pairings. Like, it is one of the most exciting WrestleMania pairings, like a Rock and Hogan, like a Rock and Austin, or a Hogan Warrior, or something along those lines. And I don't think it ever got to that point. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I just do not like John Cena, where I'm just sitting there like, at the time going into it, I thought, oh, well, Cena's going to win, and I don't care because I hate Cena. Or, Cena sucks, whatever, fuck him. I understand, it's a big match to do. The promotion behind it was really good. I understand why they're doing it. It just wasn't that interesting to me personally compared to a lot of other Mania pairings like the Rock-Austin trilogy was. But that led into their WrestleMania 28 match. And as I've said before, I thought it was a good match. It's not one of my favorites, not an all-time favorite WrestleMania main event. They got the main event spot, which I think was the right thing to do, because when you build a match for a year, you gotta have a mind for what match should go last, and that was clearly the match that needed to close. And overall, I thought it was a good match. It was an exciting match. And being a fan of his, I did mark out when The Rock won, even though it did tell me, it's like, oh shit, we're getting a rematch, aren't we? Because they're not going to let that stand. Cena's going to get that win back, which of course leads us into WrestleMania 29, where we're going to see Rock and Cena 2, twice in a lifetime. Hooray! Not that excited for the rematch. Again, not that, either guy isn't trying to sell it and make it feel like a big deal. It just doesn't feel like a big deal, because it's like, we saw it already. It was fine. I enjoyed it. I don't need to see it again. And I'm not overly excited to see it again, but whatever. But that said, The Rock, he's covered a lot of ground at WrestleMania, from the Attitude Era and to eventually going away for a few years and coming back, and now he's right back to playing a major role at WrestleMania. And that's the kind of impact that The Rock has wherever he goes and whatever he does wrestling related. He is just a larger-than-life icon, and he's always, as long as he's participating in WrestleMania, he's always going to have a big role to play. And The Rock deserves to be listed among the great WrestleMania icons, the point of this whole series of videos. And I think Rock is right up there with, the best of the best. And, for his excitement, his charisma, and everything that's great about The Rock and the major main events that his level of charisma and excitement has been able to create. So, The Rock, he's absolutely a WrestleMania icon. Talk about Attitude Era WWF without talking about Stone Cold Steve Austin. I mean, that guy was the centerpiece, the poster boy, the main personification of the entire era. When you think Attitude Era WWF, you can't help but think Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that especially carried through in the WrestleManias. Much like Hogan was in the 80s, when it came to those Attitude Era WrestleManias, Stone Cold Steve Austin was the major focus, and with good reason. He was the character that was the most interesting. He was this rebellious, rule-breaking, business-changing character. I mean, he was basically a heel that played babyface. That was basically the gist of Austin's appeal, is that he was not like other babyfaces. He wasn't the typical cookie-cutter mold. He was this gray area that had been introduced and had gotten over as a babyface. And that was the major appeal of Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that really carried through in those WrestleManias where he played a major role because, he was just that big of a deal, to say the least. And without Stone Cold Steve Austin, there is no Attitude Era. And I shudder to think where they would have been if they hadn't stumbled onto the Texas Rattlesnake as their major star attraction during that late 90s period. But let's start with his WrestleMania debut, which admittedly was not spectacular. And it's really weird. Most of the Attitude Era guys did not have spectacular WrestleMania debuts. Triple H, The Rock, and now Stone Cold Steve Austin. He debuted at WrestleMania 12 in a match against Savio Vega that was entirely forgettable and just not very good. Austin was not playing the Ringmaster at this point. He had been introduced as the Ringmaster when he came to the WWF, and was the self-appointed, or Ted DiBiase had appointed him the $1 Million Champion. He was still the $1 Million Champion by this point, but he had taken on the name of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and obviously that was a sign that he was getting better, and his character was making a change for the better. Although he hadn't quite found his identity yet. And working with Savio Vega, I mean, Savio was always, a good worker, but was always kind of a jobber to the stars. And I don't think anybody thought he was going to beat Austin, although he did eventually beat Austin in that Caribbean strap match that retired the $1 Million Man. But, this match just wasn't anything spectacular. Austin won thanks to interference from DiBiase and a belt shot with the $1 Million title. But it was a very forgettable match, and when you think of the epic WrestleMania debuts, that one doesn't come to mind. That was not Austin's day in the sun. He was the designated bumper match for the mid-card, and he was just there to fill time, and that's all he was. But then he played a much bigger role the next year at WrestleMania 13. His submission match with Bret Hart, and I've already praised it time and time and time again. It was a match. This was the match that started the Attitude Era, in my eyes. This was the match that just, it made Austin a babyface. I mean, you want to know how to do a double turn, watch that match. I mean, they executed it flawlessly. And it gave us some of, it really made the Austin character an undeniable babyface, even though, without watering down the character, that was key. But him getting bloodied up the way he did, and then being put in the sharpshooter, and then gutting it out and fighting and fighting and fighting. That, to me, is one of the greatest visuals in the history of professional wrestling, and one of the greatest moments in professional wrestling. And that kind of blood and guts wrestling really personified the Attitude Era. So to me, that was really the genesis of, everything. I mean, that really started the major boom period, and I look at that as the major starting point. But even though Austin didn't win, it was arguably, I would say, his best WrestleMania performance. It really was his major star-making performance. Austin had always had great matches before that. Go watch him in WCW. Austin was a hell of a wrestler. Okay, people don't remember. People just kind of think of him as this brawler. He was a hell of a wrestler and had many great matches. But, this was his major star-making performance and his major WrestleMania legacy-building moment. I think it's one of WrestleMania's finest matches. I think it's, I would say it's Bret's best Mania match as well. And I think, to me, more than anything else, this is the night, this is the match, this is the moment that really put Stone Cold Steve Austin on the map and really put him on the path to eventually become the big star that he eventually became. And that, of course, leads into the very next WrestleMania, which, to me, WrestleMania 14 is the definitive Attitude Era WrestleMania. That's the one that really brought the magic back to WrestleMania, but also brought that rebellious spirit and that rule-breaking kind of, smash mouth kind of style that the era was known for. And again, the main event was absolutely perfect. Austin was going up against this heel that had weaseled out of every situation, had retained the title under every cheap trick possibly imaginable. He got the title under fishy circumstances with the Montreal Screwjob, and it just built his heat as this ultimate prick all the way through. And again, it was really a unique setting that they had here with these two characters, Steve Austin versus Shawn Michaels. In many ways, both of them really embodied the Attitude Era, with Austin and Michaels both being these rule-breaking assholes that were completely different from anything that had come before it. However, they were still able to make them clear-cut babyface and heel, which is very hard to do. And it was really a unique pairing between those two, and really the perfect main event to have. And of course, you had Mike Tyson thrown into the mix, which made the match feel even bigger. And I'll say it again: WrestleMania 14 brought the magic back to WrestleMania. That was that main event just embodied the whole experience. It was perfect. Austin won the title. And that's one of the biggest title wins in WrestleMania history. The Austin era has begun, as JR would say. And it was a great moment and a perfect payoff to the path that Steve Austin had been on pretty much from WrestleMania 13 onward for the next year. It was a very satisfying title win, one of the most satisfying title wins in the history of WrestleMania. And ultimately, that put him on the path to eventually have him clash with the corporate brass and feud with Vince McMahon in one of the most personal, emotional, hate-filled rivalries in the history of professional wrestling. And really, it yielded some of the best television in WWF history, WWE history. Really fantastic stuff throughout all of '98. It really carried out throughout the year. And it really paid off. The next WrestleMania, where Austin had been screwed out of the title in September. That was the September pay-per-view. And basically everything up to that point was about getting Austin back into the title picture and ultimately winning the title back. And he kept getting screwed over, but he kept fighting back and fighting back and fighting back. And then ultimately, once Austin beat the holy dog shit out of Vince McMahon in a steel cage match in the February pay-per-view, it was time for him to take the title back. That was the last chapter, the last step in the storyline. And he went up against The Rock, who was the perfect corporate champion, as I've already said. And again, Austin and Rock, you put those two together and it's magic. They just have this awesome chemistry. It's these two very charismatic, very energized, very larger-than-life characters, and you put them together and it's a perfect pairing. It's a match made in heaven. You're never going to get a boring Austin versus Rock match. It's just never going to happen. And the way that the match ended, with Austin winning the title and getting his big celebration for the second year in a row, it was an ultimate payoff to this great storyline that they'd been booking and plotting and planning since September of the year before. And it was really the ultimate payoff to Austin McMahon and everything. Yeah, they kept it going a few months after that, but this to me was really where the high point of everything ended, and was yet another satisfying Steve Austin main event and another satisfying Steve Austin world title win. And then we move right along to WrestleMania 17. Austin had missed 16 because of his neck surgery, and he'd been gone for 10 months. So he missed WrestleMania 16, WrestleMania 2000. And we move right along to WrestleMania 17, where he once again faced The Rock in that big face versus face match in his home state of Texas, where he was clearly the hero and the big baby face of the show. And I already said it. I think this is one of my favorite WrestleMania main events of all time. I rank it very high. It's a very exciting match. It's just perfect. And if you remember the video I did where I talked about when the Attitude Era started and where it ended, like I said, I felt it started with the submission match at 13, and it ended with this match right here at WrestleMania 17. This match, Rock and Austin, to me, is the end of the Attitude Era, because it's really the end of the Stone Cold Steve Austin character as we knew him, or as the guy that was the poster boy during the Attitude Era. It was the end of that guy. And what this match did beautifully, in regards to the Austin character, was that it referenced his entire history in the match. They did the bloody sharpshooter spot, and of course, thank God we had JR on commentary to make that call, and make all the calls that happened throughout the match. And then, in a move that I marked out for, he applied the $1 Million Dream. And it was like, oh my God, he's going back to his Ringmaster days during this match. So it was really like Austin's entire WWF run was encompassed in one match. And of course, he was working with The Rock, who's only going to get the best out of him. And it was this wild, chaotic, brawl with action and wrestling. And I mean, this was one of those matches that really had everything. And it was this beautifully well-told story from start almost to finish. And this is where I'm going to give the downfall of the match. And where it really kind of worked in that Austin's history was referenced is that it was really the swan song for the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. So it was appropriate that you got basically a mini recap of Austin's entire run in the WWF, all compacted into this one match. And that really leads me to the ending, which is, the thing that keeps me from saying that Rock and Austin at WrestleMania 17 is the greatest WrestleMania match of all time is this ending. And I'll say it again, I hate the Stone Cold Steve Austin heel turn. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that they ever made. The WWE, one of the biggest mistakes they ever made. They should have never done that. And I don't think Austin's character ever recovered from it. Because it was a heel turn that nobody wanted and never needed to happen, and it made no sense, and they never really took it in a direction that it should have gone to. I mean, when they turned around a couple months later and made him the leader of the WCW faction, I was like, really, Mr. Poster Boy, Attitude Era WWF is going to lead the WCW faction, which that was like a double fuck you, because it's like, okay, Austin's in WCW, and it also meant, it's like, wow, you didn't get anybody for the WCW invasion, did you? But that's a whole other can of worms there. So I really didn't like that they did this ending with Austin and walking on with McMahon, and McMahon helping him win the title. And it's the one negative of an otherwise just wrestling perfection. It encompassed all in one match. And like I said, it's this close to being my favorite Mania match of all time. But it's just, that ending just bugs me. But where I'll cut it some slack, the heel turn is really only bad in hindsight. When I saw where they went with it, at the time it was interesting. I was like, all right, they turned Austin heel. It's a headline, if nothing else. It was shocking. Let's see where they go with it. And then I saw where they went with it. I'm like, yeah, this sucks. I wish I'd never done that. But in any case, it's still an excellent match, and I think it's one of WrestleMania's finest main events, if nothing else. And of course, Austin wins the title again, so he's got a pretty good. He's got like where The Rock loses the main event all the time. Austin always walks out with the title, which I think is really interesting. And to really highlight where I really felt like the Austin character had really flopped and really lost a lot of steam by this point. When you get to WrestleMania 18, he was working with Scott Hall. And really, Austin, not only did he have the whole heel turn, which really dragged him down in my eyes and really watered down the character, he also kind of became Cena-like in an aspect where he won all the time, he would beat up everybody, no matter what. Where Austin was very vulnerable in 98, where if you put him in there with Undertaker and Kane, he was going to lose. It was very realistic. It's like, all right, you put him in an unwinnable situation, he is not going to win. That's one of the most annoying things about Cena, is that you always suspect he's going to win, even in the most ludicrous situations where no human being alive should be able to win. Austin was starting to be put into those situations, and it was really starting to get annoying, where he was winning handicap matches where he was the one up against two guys. He would... every show would have to end with Austin kicking everybody's ass. Nobody could get over on him, and it was really starting to get grating. And that really carried over here into WrestleMania 18, where he faced Scott Hall with Kevin Nash in Scott Hall's corner. And so it basically turned into a handicap match in that aspect, and he beat the ever-living dog shit out of both of them. And he stunned Hall like 8 times. Well, it was more like 3, but still. It was like, well, there's the threat of the NWO. I mean, if Austin can beat the ever-living dog crap out of two of them. You know, who cares? And that was the major problem with this match. It was a very interesting match, very anticlimactic match. And I think it's Austin's second weakest Mania performance, behind, obviously, the match with Savio Vega. But, yeah, it was really a sign that maybe the Austin character really needed a break. And when he walked out in the middle of 2002 and basically his life just had a meltdown where, you know, he beat up Deborah and the whole shebang that went on there and, you know, with the spousal abuse and everything, you know, taking him off WWE TV for a while was actually a really good thing because I think he'd really gotten stale. Really gotten stale. And I think, you know, giving us an opportunity to miss him really helped him out in that aspect. And that led, of course, into WrestleMania 19. Everything had smoothed over with Vince McMahon. Austin had made his return, and what ultimately was his swan song was his final wrestling match to date, where he faced The Rock for the third and final time at WrestleMania. And as I said, you know, it was the book being closed on that rivalry, and in a way, yeah, I felt like the Attitude Era really ended with WrestleMania 17, but it was kind of, you know, saying goodbye to that era to do this match one more time. And Austin's loss, it was a really good way for him to go out. I think just one last great match with The Rock, and he put Rock over, and that's the end of it. And that's the last time you see Stone Cold Steve Austin wrestle. And it was really good and very emotional. And of course, we didn't know that night that it was Austin's farewell, but of course we would find that out later. But that was his final WrestleMania match to date, although I'm still waiting for him to face Punk at some point. We'll see if that happens in 30. But, you know, that's not the end of his roles at WrestleMania, because let me tell you, if you need a special guest referee for a shitty WrestleMania match, Stone Cold Steve Austin's your guy. WrestleMania 20, he was the referee of the Goldberg-Lesnar match. That match was another train wreck. Austin didn't really add anything to it. He's just the guy counting the three. He stunned both guys, which to me was kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, they were all leaving anyway, so it didn't really matter, because it was really weird. It was weird how they did the build-up, because the way they built it up, you thought the feud was Lesnar and Austin. And I remember the go-home SmackDown leading into WrestleMania 20. That last segment they did was amazing. But I sat there thinking, it's like, yeah, it's a shame the match isn't Lesnar versus Austin, but oh well. That was really weird. So then he showed up at WrestleMania 21 during that Piper's Pit segment, which was boring as all hell. And, you know, I think they thought that putting Piper and Austin in the ring together with microphones was going to yield this epic, you know, back and forth, intense interview segment, and it really wasn't. It was very mundane. And then Carlito came out and got his ass kicked, and of course, and this is, and again, another thing that really hurt Austin was that his shtick, what was originally this really intense, really violent and dangerous character, had kind of become a comedy shtick, where, okay, glass breaks, he runs out there, drinks a few beers, stuns some poor sap, drinks some more beers, glass breaks, he leaves. He had a t-shirt, actually. Arrive, raise hell, leave. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all he does. And it was really this very, you know, for a character that was so unpredictable at his prime, he became very predictable and very boring every time he showed up. And Piper's Pit was definitely one of those instances. But, you know, he showed up again at WrestleMania 23, where he was the referee of the Battle of the Billionaires, which wasn't horrible. I was entertained by that for what it was. The thing that I always thought was funny about this match is that, you know, Donald Trump and Vince McMahon had the bet with the losing guy having their hair shaved, their head shaved bald. And Austin was the special guest referee. Nobody seems to remember that Lashley and Umaga were the wrestlers in that match. And I remember the match graphic was hilarious because it was like Donald Trump and Vince McMahon superimposed on the screen with Austin in the middle. And I used to joke, it's like, you know, I can kind of sort of see Lashley and Umaga back there in the background. They're up there, they are. I can kind of see them. So I always thought it was funny that the referee and McMahon and the celebrity took... I mean, the wrestlers were really... the least important part of that match, which I thought was really funny. Even before the match started, I was like, wow, it's like, yeah, they don't matter. They're superfluous. It's all about Trump and McMahon and Austin. And he did, you know, stun Donald Trump, which was kind of funny, even though it was like the sloppiest stunner. Well, no, the one he hit on Linda McMahon at the Raw Homecoming, that was the sloppiest stunner of all time. But, yeah, it was a really, you know, just par for the course for Austin. It's like, yeah, he just goes out there, does his thing, and whatever. then at WrestleMania 25, and this was a year where I was really disappointed that they didn't play up Austin more, because it's in his home state of Texas. He's being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Jericho's doing this angle where he's disrespecting Hall of Famers. Why wouldn't you do anything between Jericho and Austin? I couldn't understand that. To this day, I'm still flabbergasted. And apparently the original plan was to do Jericho and Mickey Rourke, to which I say, it never dawned on them to do Jericho and Austin in some capacity. All right, I mean, it's right there for you. I saw it. It's just right there. Everything you can do. If not a match, at least Austin being the one to get his revenge on Jericho on behalf of the other legends. And it's like, no, the whole thing was just set up for Mickey Rourke to beat him. And it's like, well, who cares? I mean, whatever. I don't give a shit. And it was really wasted potential, I think. And of course, Austin came out for the Hall of Fame segment, came out in his little four-wheeler, drank some beer, yada, 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 and did the same old thing. And they really didn't do anything with Austin beyond that. And I'm like, that's really disappointing, I thought. They had a chance to do something really cool, and they didn't do it. And his final WrestleMania appearance to date was, once again, as a special guest referee, and it was in one of the worst WrestleMania matches, or no, the worst WrestleMania match of all time, between Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler in just an absolute disaster of a match. And Austin was part of that. I mean, the post-match antics with him stunning everybody, it got old and boring real quick. But you know, the non-wrestling post-Austin's wrestling career stuff is not really indicative of his contributions to WrestleMania, because during the Attitude Era especially, he contributed so many big matches, so many big moments, and so many big main events for WrestleMania that he definitely added to the legacy of WrestleMania. He's one of the poster boys of WrestleMania. He's right up there with Hogan. He's right up there with any WrestleMania icon you can throw at me. Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's the poster boy of the Attitude Era, and if you're the poster boy of the hottest era in the history of professional wrestling, then you absolutely deserve to be mentioned on a list where we showcase the Immortals. Showcasing the Immortals with none other than the immortal Hulk Hogan. And who better to close out this countdown with than Hulk Hogan? I mean, the evolution of WrestleMania and its establishing of an identity really coincides with the rise of Hulkamania. And Hulk Hogan to WrestleMania is sort of like Santa Claus to Christmas. You really can't think of one without thinking of the other. And Hogan is sort of, to me anyway, like the main icon of WrestleMania. And there's no coincidence that Hulkamania and WrestleMania sound so similar. Why they have such similar names? Because the rise of both really coincided with each other and really, grew and developed at the same time. And Hulk Hogan in those early years really helped to establish an identity for WrestleMania and give it a lot of big matches and moments to really establish that early identity and really allow WrestleMania to evolve and grow and become what it is today. And going over Hulk Hogan's WrestleMania history, we start obviously with WrestleMania 1 and that big tag match where he teamed up with Mr. T against Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, with Snuka and Hogan in T's corner and Cowboy Bob Orton and Piper in Orndorff's corner. I always wondered why they didn't just make that a six-man tag, but whatever. You had Billy Martin as a celebrity guest, also Muhammad Ali, Liberace. A lot of different factors going into this match, and it's a very star-studded, big main event match for the first WrestleMania, and really fit in with what they were trying to accomplish with that first WrestleMania and mixing wrestling with celebrities. And I felt it worked very well and was very entertaining, and there's so many key moments in that match that have sort of lived on and made it into the WrestleMania highlight reels. And overall, I think it's a very entertaining main event and a good first one for WrestleMania. And of course, Hogan and Mr. T got the win, and that moves right along into WrestleMania 2, which was divided up into three parts. Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy in a steel cage match for the WWF title, which was the main event of the show, was also the main event of the Los Angeles portion of the show. And it was... it's got a couple of interesting historical things to it. It was the first steel cage match in WrestleMania history, and to date the only steel cage match in WrestleMania history, if you don't count the two Hell in a Cells. that have happened. But it's also the first WWF World Heavyweight Championship match in the history of WrestleMania, so that helps it stand out as well. As a match, it's kind of the typical Hulk Hogan versus big guy match, you know, and Hogan wrestled a lot of big fat guys during his main run as champion. And it's really more along those lines. It's like, all right, he's going to get a body slam, he's going to get beat up for a while, and he's going to make Hulk up, do his comeback, whatever. And that's basically what this was. It was a little violent, with blood and everything. Bundy got busted open, so it has some stuff in there, but it's really a very basic bitch kind of match in a time when WrestleMania was still very basic bitch. They hadn't quite established that WrestleMania standard yet, and making it live up to this larger-than-life reputation. It was really just... It was still kind of just, you know, ordinary stuff with celebrities thrown in the mix to kind of glitz it up a little bit. And that's really all this match was. It was just fitting into that early WrestleMania identity where they really hadn't found that formula, that winning formula to really make WrestleMania that larger-than-life show. Hogan got the win in the cage match as well, and would do much better the next year, obviously. His match with Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3 really is the blueprint on how to do a WrestleMania main event, and it's obviously the biggest wrestling match of all time, with the hype surrounding it, the angle that they did with Andre being jealous of his friend Hogan and wanting the title shot. That Piper's Pit that they did, where Andre joined up with Heenan and turned on Hogan, I think is one of the best things that WWF has ever filmed, WWE, whatever. I mean, that is just a fantastic segment all around. It really sold that match. And there were so many things that they did, like the contract signing. I don't recall ever seeing a contract signing before that. There might have been, I don't know, but to me, on my experience, that's the earliest example I can recall seeing a contract signing. And it really added to the sort of the realism of what they were presenting and really made it feel larger than life. Nowadays, contract signings are cliche, but back then it was really a big deal to do that, and really helped that match stand out more. I mean, it had everything, and of course both guys were viewed as being unbeatable. Hogan had been champion for 3 years, and they got people to buy into Andre being unbeaten for 15 years, even though he really wasn't. If you go through Andre's entire career, he wasn't unbeaten, but they got people to buy it, and Andre was this unbeatable giant, which made him the perfect obstacle for somebody like a Hulk Hogan. And it was really the perfect match to have at this WrestleMania. There really was no other match that could have generated this kind of buzz, and like I said, I mean, this created the standard for the WrestleMania main event, that larger-than-life, epic showdown, who's gonna win, that can't-miss match. Hogan-Andre was really the first WrestleMania main event to really have that. And I felt it really delivered on that aspect, because the build-up was so good that it created this larger-than-life atmosphere. Of course, that large crowd and that large venue really helped as well. And I thought the story they told was really good. And yes, both guys are limited, and Andre basically had one foot in the grave at that, you know, at this point in his career. But you know, if you tell the right story and if you build the matchup correctly, you can get around your limitations that way. And Hogan and Andre definitely did. I still feel like the match is very dramatic, and it's like, oh my God, is Hogan going to come back from this one? And it's one of those matches, I've watched it at least 100 times, and I still get goosebumps whenever I watch it. It's just a magical moment, if nothing else. And they did so many cool things in this match, like them brawling outside of the ring. Back in those days, if you saw a brawl outside the ring, it normally meant that you were getting a double countout. And Jesse Ventura, great on commentary, made that call. It was like, don't let this match end in a countout. And because there was legitimate fear that that could happen, and it didn't happen. And, you know, that's not the case today. I mean, if you see both, I mean, it's not a match if you don't see both guys brawl outside the ring nowadays. But back then, I mean, there was legitimate fear that we were going to get a screwy finish when that happened. And of course, the moment where Hogan knocked down Andre, hulked up, and then body slammed him. I mean, that really is the defining visual of WrestleMania. It's one of the greatest moments in professional wrestling history. It's just, and again, creating that standard for WrestleMania. That was one of the first really huge WrestleMania moments. And I think that this match is the crowning achievement of Hulk Hogan's career. I've already talked about it from Andre's perspective, but from Hogan's, I mean, that was what really raised Hulkamania as this legendary run in professional wrestling. And I think you couldn't have asked for this to turn out any better than it did. It was exactly what it needed to be. It was a perfect payoff to a great storyline and a great ending that really helped to establish an identity and a standard for how big WrestleMania main events should be. So Hogan and Andre at WrestleMania 3, I think, is just a classic, legendary match all around. Largely just great booking, great presentation all around. It was fantastic. Then you move on to WrestleMania 4, which had one of the best angles to set up a WrestleMania, with the whole Hogan-Andre rematch and the double referees with Ted DiBiase trying to buy the title. I mean, that really is one of the great heel-building moments with Ted DiBiase. I just love that whole segment. It's a shame that the tournament didn't quite live up to that awesome segment and that awesome setup. And Hogan at WrestleMania 4, he was part of that tournament, wrestled Andre in the second round. They both had buys into the second round. And, the match itself was pretty much, it paled in comparison to their WrestleMania 3 match. It was basically just, typical Hogan versus big guy style affair. But what really shocked me, watching it the first time around, was when the match ended in a double disqualification, eliminating both Hogan and Andre from the tournament. And once that happened, that really opened the door. I was like, oh, wow, who's going to win this thing? And, of course, that pretty much narrowed it down to Ted DiBiase and Randy Savage, which ultimately was the finals. DiBiase versus Savage was a great finals to have, and obviously Savage winning the title that night, to me, is one of the most satisfying endings to any WrestleMania. With all the flaws that WrestleMania 4 has, that ending was great. And Hogan played a huge role in that ending to equal out Andre in DiBiase's corner. That was a great moment when Liz went to the back and pulled out Hogan, and the crowd just went crazy for it. And it really paid off well, and it was nice to, have a WrestleMania event that included Hogan but not as a wrestler. So it was kind of Hogan giving a rub to the fresh WrestleMania main event, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know. But I thought that ending, again, couldn't have come off any better. I thought that was fantastic. Even though the show was riddled with flaws, I thought Hogan's role in that main event in a non-wrestling capacity was very, very key to the success of that ending coming off as well as it did. And, of course, it helped set up the next WrestleMania main event, which was WrestleMania 5, Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage for the WWF title. Savage had turned heel at this point, his growing jealousy of Hogan. Of course, I should also say that they were the Mega Powers, that awesome tag team that was like this unbeatable good guy force. I mean, you put Hogan and Savage in a team together, it's like, oh my God, nobody's going to beat them. I mean, Jesus. I'm shocked they never got the tag titles, to be perfectly honest. But that was a great partnership and a great main event level tag team. Then they got a lot of big matches out of it. But then when they eventually did the turn with Savage's rising jealousy and the whole thing of, he's upset that he feels Hogan is trying to steal his woman and all of that stuff, it was really a great angle and really paid off the whole partnership and everything that had happened at WrestleMania 4 and built it up over the course of a year and did that great payoff at WrestleMania 5. And I really enjoyed this main event. It was nice to see Hogan work with somebody that was quicker and more athletic rather than the typical big guy match that they always put Hogan in. And I thought the two meshed very, very well together. I thought it was a very good WrestleMania main event, one of my favorites from the early years. And, great clash of character. In a lot of ways, it's kind of the defining WrestleMania main event of the 80s. Because, I mean, when you think of 80s WWF, who comes to mind more than Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan? Not many other guys. Those are really the two defining guys of the era. So to put them in a WrestleMania main event was really a great idea. And I thought it was a great, hard-hitting, action-packed, dramatic match with Hogan getting the win and winning a second WWF title. And, of course, Hogan and Savage would wrestle each other about 18 dozen times after that. But this was their best match, in my opinion, and really, really good one. And then we move into another huge main event, again, establishing how Hulk Hogan was able to just get big match after big match at WrestleMania. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6, the Ultimate Challenge, with both the WWF title and the Intercontinental title up for grabs. I mean, this was a huge match, and they didn't do a heel turn with either guy. It was the two biggest baby faces in the company squaring off, and they basically forced the fans to pick a side. And it worked out tremendously well, and it was really, again, big venue, big crowd, which helped it even more, and it got this really unique crowd reaction where you hear cheers and boos for both guys, and it was 50-50 based on my personal take on watching the match as many times as I have. It really does sound like a 50-50 reaction, and you didn't get anything like that back in those days. And having a big babyface versus babyface match was just huge back then. I mean, it was humongous. It was unheard of. Nowadays it happens, I don't want to say regularly, but it's happened quite a few times since then. But back then, such a match was unthinkable. So to do this match, again, at a WrestleMania, in the main event, with Hulk Hogan involved, and with a guy whose popularity rivaled him at that point, was fantastic. It was a brilliant idea. Brilliant idea. And personally, it's one of my favorite WrestleMania main events of all time. It's probably in the top 3 somewhere for me. It was just great, wonderful presentation all around. Just a great WrestleMania main event. And even, made shocking by the fact that the Ultimate Warrior defeated Hulk Hogan. In this match where they seemed to be equal in power and all this drama of who's going to win, Warrior beat Hogan after all these years of Hogan being viewed as being unbeatable. He beat him clean, and it's like, wow, that's shocking. And as a kid, and I was a big Hogan fan as a kid, so I was, you had Warrior fans, you were Hogan fans, and I was a Hogan fan back then. But I remember watching that. It really had an effect on me when I watched Hogan not only lose, but he presented the title to the Warrior and congratulated him after the match. I don't know. I thought that was a great lesson in sportsmanship. Great lesson for kids, if nothing else, and really a great visual. And Hulk Hogan leaving at the end of that match without the title, looking dejected on the ring card and everything. It's like, but, passing the torch and congratulating the new champion. That, to me, I often look back on that as like, man, that probably should have been the end of Hogan's career, because you can't ask for a better ending than that. It's like what I said about Savage at WrestleMania 7. It's like, man, what a way to go out. I mean, that's a hell of a way to end your career. And, of course, if we'd gotten that, we would have never gotten the NWO. So, I don't know. For that, it was a great main event and a great WrestleMania moment as well at the end. And I thought it was, looking back on it, I think it's better that Hogan lost that match, just from an artistic standpoint, because it did create that great, shocking moment. And it was more poetic that he lost that match. And speaking of Hogan losing at WrestleMania, I'll get into that in one of the later ones. But he came back. He was right back in the main event at WrestleMania 7 against Sergeant Slaughter, who was doing the Iraqi turncoat angle. And I enjoyed this match. Of course, I've already said that WrestleMania 7 is one of my favorite WrestleManias, but I enjoyed this main event for what it was. It was all about the good guy getting revenge on the bad guy and letting the fans leave home happy. And for that, I thought it was solid. It was a little violent, too, which, again, was rare back in those days with blood and everything. And, of course, that's non-existent nowadays. But I enjoyed the main event for what it was. I thought it was solid. And Hogan got his 3rd WWF title win, and it was a good, solid main event. It fit the theme of the show, the whole USA theme that the show had. So it worked. And, of course, Warrior had flopped as champion, so they probably just wanted to get Hogan right back into that spot. And unfortunately, we were getting into the point where Hogan was really starting to get stale as a main event talent. And, of course, maybe that's part of the residual effect of him losing at WrestleMania 6. Maybe that was just the last, maybe that was the peak of Hulkamania, and anything after that was just kind of a downward trend. And after WrestleMania 7, he got more and more stale. And that leads us into WrestleMania 8, where he was supposed to face Ric Flair for the WWF title. That match had even been signed. And then they changed it once Sid had turned on him, and they decided to go with that match. And by this point, it's like, okay, we've seen Hogan's friends turn on him. We saw it with Hogan. We saw it with Andre. We saw it with Savage. We saw it with Orndorff. And we've seen Hogan wrestle big guys. I mean, this is not covering a whole lot of new ground. And that kind of plays into the whole, like, Hogan's getting stale thing that they had in 1992. And at the very least, they did make it interesting in the sense that, they promoted this as possibly being Hogan's retirement match, which was like, all right, that's interesting. Of course it wasn't. And Sid as being the psychotic monster that was going around just killing, bitches left and right. And I thought, well, maybe they'll have this wild and crazy match. And they did not. It was kind of this ordinary typical Hogan versus the big guy match. It really wasn't anything that special. Sid kicked out of the leg drop, and Gorilla Monsoon completely no-sold it on commentary. It's like I just watched him kick out of the leg drop, and they're treating it like nothing happened. No, but all right. I mean, shouldn't that be a big deal, or are we just going to pretend that didn't happen? Okay, I guess we're going to pretend that didn't happen. And looking back on it, I kind of wish maybe they should have done a no DQ match and just let them have this wild match where there's just swinging chairs at each other because. No DQ matches were rare back then, but they weren't unheard of, and I think that would have spiced this match up a little bit to have like a no-holds-barred match or something like that. I don't know. And Sid was limited, of course, so Hogan wasn't going to get that much out of him. And I think this is probably Hogan's worst WrestleMania match, and kind of a weak one. And what keeps me from saying it's one of the worst WrestleMania main events is the fact that Warrior returned at the end, which goddamn, Ultimate Warrior, for a guy that catches as much flack as he does, especially for me, it's like, he was awesome at Mania 6, he was awesome at Mania 7, and he saved the main event at 8. So it's like, Warrior had his moments. Maybe I should have put him on this countdown. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe if I had done 15, Warrior would have been on there. But, but overall, as a main event, Warrior's return made it feel cool. And you got that big, energized ending out of it, if nothing else. I mean, it is one of the more memorable Mania endings. But the match itself, I think, is pretty lackluster. I think it's Hogan's worst, by far, if I had to pick a worst. But it wasn't the end of Hulk Hogan. He came back at WrestleMania 9 to help out his buddy Brutus Beefcake in that rip-off Mega Powers team, the Mega Maniacs, to take on Money Inc. for the tag titles. And yay, Ted DiBiase holds a win over Hogan at WrestleMania. It was by DQ, but who cares? Ted DiBiase actually holds a win over Hogan. The match itself I thought was a lot of fun. It was really weird and chaotic and everything and crazy, but as a match I thought it was exciting and fun and entertaining for what it was. I was shocked that Hogan and Beefcake didn't win the titles. Of course, once we saw the ending to WrestleMania 9, we know why that didn't happen. But the tag match I thought was pretty fun, and I thought it was exciting. And Money Inc. actually retaining the titles against Hogan was like, holy shit. Ted DiBiase and IRS, that was probably the biggest win of their run as a tag team, was surviving WrestleMania against Hulk Hogan. I mean, that's Hogan didn't lose many times at WrestleMania, so to have that happen was a pretty big deal. Of course, that leads us into the main event, which I've already talked about several times, where Yokozuna beat Brett for the title, then Hogan comes out, and we get an impromptu title match where Hogan wins in 30 seconds. It's political bullshit. It's one of the worst Mania endings, maybe the worst Mania ending. And it's just dog crap. It's just, even at my age at that point, I was 8 years old at the time, I just remember watching and thinking, that's horseshit. Like, that's bullshit. And it's like, that's not right, that something like that was allowed to go down. And it's just Hogan political bullshit. There's no other way to sum that match up. And, it was probably for the best that Hulkamania got a break after this, because they were really pushing it at this point. That was his 5th title win, and it's like, oh God, really? We gotta go through the Hogan as champion deal again? And him getting a break and staying away from the WWF for almost a decade was for the best, I think, and allowed Hulkamania to freshen up. And of course he went down to WCW, and Hulkamania, I mean, you really saw the Hulkamania still down there in his early years in WCW, and that led to the creation of the NWO, which like rejuvenated his whole career. But after all those years in WCW, once WCW was bought, in a move I thought I would never see, I never dreamed that Hulk Hogan would come back to the WWF. I thought that door had been closed. It was never going to happen. I thought that was it. But in 2002, Hulk Hogan came back with the NWO, with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And my God, he faced The Rock at WrestleMania. That to me was a big match. I'm like, okay, that's a WrestleMania caliber match. It's like two guys that I never thought I would ever see work with each other. Having a match at WrestleMania. And this WrestleMania really it didn't have a whole lot going for it, because I believe that Mania 18 was supposed to be the payoff to the WCW invasion. But I think by the time Survivor Series rolled around, they were like, oh God, we can't keep this going for another 5 months. Let's just wrap it up now. Because, I mean, the WCW invasion was a disaster. There's no other way to really say it. And it really left them with nothing for WrestleMania 18, and they really didn't have a whole lot going into it. Of course, I've talked about how shitty the main event angle was, and I talked about how a lot of the card was kind of thrown together because they didn't know what they were doing. This match, even though it got the rushed 1 month build-up, felt huge. It was like, oh my god, that's a huge match to have at WrestleMania, and really generated a huge buzz. And even though I knew Rock was going to win this match, I tuned in because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, how are Rock and Hogan going to play off of each other? Is Hogan going to Hulk up? Is he going to be more the babyface, old-school Hulk Hogan, or is he going to be more NWO Hulk Hogan? How's the crowd going to react? I don't know. So I tuned into this WrestleMania just to see that match, because I was like, fuck all, I have no idea what's going to happen in this match. And that crowd reaction was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like that. It was just this really wild and emotional response for Hogan. Of course, Rock got booed, but I think it was a better move to put Hogan up against Rock than it was Austin, because like I've said, I felt Austin had really fizzled out by that point, and Rock was the more exciting talent to me. So I was more excited to get him going up against The Rock. And, The Rock's charisma really put him on Hogan's level when you could look at the all-time greats in wrestling history. And this match was just unbelievable. It was just two charismatic, larger-than-life icons having this really emotionally charged match. And the nostalgia felt for Hogan coming back to WrestleMania, coming back to the WWF. And, that crowd just treated him like a god. I've never seen anything like that before. And there aren't too many matches that I can compare this to. It was just this wild, crazy match where the crowd reacted to everything that they did. And it was just an amazing experience, just watching it live. And when Hogan hulked up, my God. I mean, it was like I'd reverted back to being a 5-year-old. I was like, wow, that is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Watching him hulk up on The Rock was just it was unbelievable. I can't even describe it. And, of course, Rock got the win. And Hogan had this big WrestleMania moment where they shook hands at the end and ultimately did the pose down. And it was this nice moment for Hogan. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, I kind of wish that had been the end of Hogan's career, because that would have been awesome. But a great way to close it. But unbelievable WrestleMania match. It's one of my personal favorite WrestleMania matches. And if I'm going to put it up against Hogan's WrestleMania matches, I would it's right up there with the match with Warrior. Those two are my favorite Hulk Hogan WrestleMania matches, his match with Warrior and his match with The Rock. And they're the two big WrestleMania matches that Hulk Hogan lost. And I don't know if it's just makes it resonate more that Hogan lost those matches, or that the great immortal Hulk Hogan showed vulnerability and had to react to defeat, and that just made it more poignant. I don't know. But I just think that's really funny. It's like, wow, his two best WrestleMania matches are the ones that he lost. And it's kind of the same way with Austin, where Austin's best WrestleMania match was the submission match against Bret, and it's the one that he lost. And that was his big star-making performance. And it's really funny how you can look like a megastar in defeat sometimes. And I think those two big losses, really helped those matches and really created some great moments for Hogan, even in those type of situations. So those are my two favorite WrestleMania matches. They also happened at Skydome, which is really weird. And yeah, I'm pretty much on par with anybody else that says, Hogan and Rock really should have closed that show. I mean, Triple H and Jericho was a disaster, but really, it should have been Hogan and Rock that closed out that event. But they didn't, and that's how it goes. But, Hulkamania had returned. He was back in the red and the yellow. Not long after that, he got another run with the title. 1 month nostalgia run that he had. He was actually the last WWF champion, because they changed to the WWE while he held the belt. So you can actually say that Hogan was the last WWF champion. And they moved along from there, and he eventually feuded with Vince McMahon. And that led to a WrestleMania match between the two. And I have to say, while I had my misgivings of them promoting this match like it was the biggest match on the show, I mean, they had Angle Lesnar, Rock and Austin 3, Michaels and Jericho, and this was the match that was on all the promotional material, and this was the match that it's on my DVD cover. I mean, that's the one that's on the DVD cover. That's the match that got the major hype at the press conference. I'm like, really? The match between the two old guys? That's the one you want to hype as your biggest match? All right. Okay, if you say so. But as the match itself, I thought it was damn good. I think it's, on this particular WrestleMania, which is one of the best WrestleManias ever, I put it second behind Michaels and Jericho as far as my favorite matches from that show goes. I thought it was really chaotic, wild, exciting match that really pulled out every bell and whistle you could possibly imagine, with Vince doing a leg drop off the ladder and that shot of him with the blood on his face coming up over the side of the ring and smiling. It was, everybody said he looked like Satan, and it was just a perfect comparison because it's absolutely true. And just all kinds of entertaining stuff, with Piper showing up and interfering in the match. That got a huge reaction, and that was very appropriate for this match that was, quote, 20 years in the making and everything. It was really great to have Piper play a role in that. And it was this violent, crazy match, and, you know, Vince always, except for the match with Brett, Vince always managed to make his matches entertaining, whether he had to overbook the fuck out of it or not. And this match was great. I thought it was this really exciting, wild street fight that was, it was just fantastic. It was a wonderful, wonderful match, and Hogan got the win, and it was a great last WrestleMania match for Hogan, and it was his last WrestleMania match. And hopefully it will be his last, because, you know, you look at Hogan now, it's like, I hope he never wrestles again, because he looks like he's just made of toothpicks at this point with as many surgeries as he's had. But, you know, he did have one more WrestleMania appearance, and that was at 21, WrestleMania Goes Hollywood. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame, so obviously he had that big segment where all the Hall of Famers stood on the stage, and Hogan had his big moment as well. And that was a great last WrestleMania moment. He goes out being inducted into the Hall of Fame. I think that's actually a really good final WrestleMania appearance for somebody. A really nice bookend to his career, I think. A nice capstone to his experience at WrestleMania. And, of course, he also had the segment with Muhammad Hassan where he came out, got the big nostalgia pop from the crowd, had that big moment where he beat up Muhammad Hassan and everything. And that got a great reaction from the crowd, and I thought it was great. I thought that really came off well, and it really put a lot of things into motion, with Hogan returning, having the tag match at Backlash, and then ultimately having his match with Shawn Michaels at SummerSlam, which I was there live for, and I really enjoyed that match, despite Shawn's overselling, which is unfortunately what the match is known for. But, you know, for a final WrestleMania appearance, I thought it was a damn good one for Hogan, and it, you know, it was in a non-wrestling capacity, but it still came off really, really well. And, you know, if Hogan never shows up at WrestleMania again, I think, you know, his legacy at WrestleMania is really an excellent one. And I thought that was a great way to close it. And, you know, Hogan, nobody helped build WrestleMania in those early years more than Hulk Hogan, with the big main events that he had and the big moments that he had, and really establishing an identity and a larger-than-life feel for WrestleMania. I mean, Hogan, I've heard a lot of people argue that Shawn Michaels is not Mr. WrestleMania, Hulk Hogan is. And I, of course, I did a whole video about it, about how do you define Mr. WrestleMania. And yes, Shawn's had more great matches than anybody. And yeah, Undertaker's had the streak, and Austin really carried the ball for the Attitude Era and really generated that huge spark. But as far as giving WrestleMania its identity and really establishing those larger-than-life main event matches and really making WrestleMania the showcase of the Immortals, Hulk Hogan is the guy. I mean, when you think of WrestleMania, Hulk Hogan is the #1 guy that comes to mind. At least he is for me. You know, you couldn't do a showcasing the Immortals countdown without talking about Hulk Hogan. He was a one-of-a-kind legend, and he is, more than anybody else, he's the guy I think of the most when I think of WrestleMania's long and successful history.